A Kitsune Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 13, Outnumbered. Katan Rikan no Jutsu, Suitan Mizutan no Jutsu. Naruto's hands slapped together and a half dome of water covered the front of his body up to his head, just as a large stream of fire impacted. The moment the fire stopped, he sped through another pattern of seals. Suitan Muzu Jaburitsu no Jutsu. Several javelins formed from the shield and shot through the steam towards his attackers. There were many splashes, but a single impact and a shout of pain signaled a hit with the chakra cloak gone. He was able to feel the Nin's signature blink out of existence. 27 fighters, 1 leader, he mentally counted off. The fight had started mere minutes ago, but that was his first kill, bearing the two at the start. Disappointing considering how long it would usually take him. Doton Iwa Tokefushin no Jutsu. Naruto leaped into the air to avoid the spikes of rock now sticking out of ground, deflecting a few thrown kunai and shuriken with one of his own. Raitan Raikua Hitafui no Jutsu. Futan Jaro no Jutsu, spying the blast of lightning accelerating towards him. Naruto countered with his own blast of wind. The elemental superiority combined with Naruto's stronger chakra meant the lightning was obliterated, and the former Kumo shinobi responsible was simply turned into a fine red mist when it impacted. 27 fighters, 1 leader, Suitan, Suhi no Jutsu, Katan, Hatore Oita no Jutsu, Katan, Jukai Kyo no Jutsu. Keeping in mind the other hostiles in the area, the wind technique also severed to punch him backwards, which meant that the 3 jutsu that followed missed. Landing on a pillar, Naruto sighted the perpetrators and ran through hand signs. Futan Daitoba, the gust of wind was strong enough to uproot a few flowers and bushes in the surrounding area. The shinobi faced with it were turned into red paste on the floor from the sheer pressure. 23 fighters, 1 leader. Daton Dorida no Jutsu, a large head of a dragon appeared in place of the spikes and spat large globs of mud at him, forcing him to retreat from his high ground. His speed and agility was more than enough for him to continue evading the projectiles. They were annoying, however, so he threw a handful of shuriken at the Iwonin. Though none were kill shots, one buried itself into the man's shoulder, the pain causing the head to destabilize and collapse. Unfortunately, the momentary distraction allowed the 3 others to close and engage at close range. One landed a kick on his midsection, accelerating his descent towards the ground, but he landed in a handstand and pushed off into a backflip. The 3 attackers landing where he was a moment ago, smirking underneath his mask. Naruto pinged the seal he had left on the ground, and the kunoichi in the middle was incinerated in the blast without so much as a scream, while the shinobi either side were merely knocked away with minor side singes. They at least acknowledged spacing it seemed. And Naruto swerved to the side, and a swarm of water and stone shuriken only slightly cut into his flak jacket. With a quick kaminari, he switched with the potted plant to avoid the explosive tag hidden within. Now hidden once again, Naruto took stock of the situation. Tekiyojin had sat back and was watching the fight calmly, which he was somewhat thankful for. The fight that had peeled off had moved on, presumably to stop any reinforcements from arriving, the bodies from the previous group creating a large graveyard. The rest were wandering around the area trying to find him. Suiton, Suiyanda no Jutsu. Correction, they had found him. Naruto leapt from his spot in time for the water dragon to miss, however. The resulting explosion knocked him on his back and winded him. The area where he had knelt now nothing more than a crater. Jumping back to his feet, he began moving again, running through the signs Katan Hotaru. Naruto raised his right hand towards the enemy, and small fireballs gathered at the tips of his fingers before shooting off at impossible speeds towards them, evading any attempt to stop them and crashing into the ground. The explosion, larger than their size, would expect encased the 2 shinobi. 21 fighters, 1 leader. Doton Doryuso. Naruto planted his feet and weaved the snake sign. Raitan Jian. The spear of lightning torn apart the approaching spears and punctured the Iwa missing Nin, creating a hole the size of a large fist through his chest. 20 fighters, 1 leader. Suitan Data Daibakufu no Jutsu. Naruto's eyes widen as they herald the cascade of water heading his way. He swore and weaved the seals of his own. That was an A-rank jutsu as he needed something to match it. Futon Fujin's Shirudo, Naruto ran through over 30 hand seals in a couple of seconds, finishing in the Tori sign, the seal strongest when used in wind techniques like Tora was for fire. Naruto's chakra surged to match the approaching tsunami, and a great tornado of wind appeared from the base of Naruto's feet and rose up surrounding the shinobi in a protective embrace. Rather than sitting and waiting for the waterfall to develop his position, Naruto thrust his hand forward with another burst of chakra. The tornado, now easily the size of the encroaching waterfall, rushed forward to meet it. The two jutsu met with a clash that almost sounded like thunder. Both elements fought for dominance for a few seconds before wind finally won out and forced the waterfall to collapse upon itself, flooding the courtyard in the process. Naruto applied chakra to his feet and stepped up onto the now ankle-high water and surveyed the situation. He spied the three Kiri shinobi that perfected the jutsu, now looking possibly nervous at their jutsu not only being matched but taken out. An empty scroll lay floating before them, likely where the water came from. Before he could capitalize, the water rippled underneath him, and two more Kirinin and a Takinin jumped out brandishing various weapons. The first pair held two simple katanas, the third, on the other hand, carried two sickles connected to a chain. That was a little more difficult. Not having the time or space to draw his Nijito, he quickly reached up and unsheathed his Tanto in time to deflect a quick stab by the nearest Kirinin. He turned and grabbed the other Kirinin, who tried sneaking up while his back was turned. Pulling him close, Naruto locked the shinobi's arm between his side and his own arm. Now immobile, Naruto kneed him in the stomach and then shoulder barged him in the nose, breaking it in a spray of blood. Hearing the clinking of a chin, Naruto twisted his body out the way of a thrown sickle. As he dodged, he simultaneously broke his captive's arm at the below the elbow and shoulder before throwing him out the way so he could dodge the sickle on the return journey and another swipe from the first katana wielder. Naruto raised his tanto to block a downward swipe from the persistent swinging missing man, retaliated with his own stab, which deflected off to the side, unfortunately putting him off balance. His opponent attempted his own stab, but despite being off balance, Naruto twisted out of the way, receiving only a small cut through his flak jacket. Now behind his opponent, he wasted no time in dispatching him with a quick stab through the back of the neck. With no time to withdraw his tanto, Naruto backflipped to avoid pursuing the spurt of water that easily cleaved through the position he once occupied. He landed behind the unsuspecting culprit, the one whose arm he had previously broken, and finished him off with a quick snap of the neck. Unfortunately, he was unable to completely dodge the sickle this time, and hissed in pain as it wrapped around his left arm, the blade digging painfully into his skin. They had a short tug of war before the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he ducked once more, allowing a Kumo nin to fly over his head, and missing a strike with two kunai, who rolled to his feet and span in an attempt to kick towards Naruto's head, who, despite being restrained, managed to use his forearm to block the kick before it connected. Naruto grabbed the man's ankle and forced him into a flip, allowing him to retrieve a kunai and easily slice through the chain with a little application of wind chakra. Not even looking behind, he threw the kunai directly through the Kumonin's throat, who had just landed on his feet. Before he could re-engage the annoying Takinin, he was forced to dive to the side to avoid a shark jumping out the water towards him. He had barely landed when he was forced to move again, or risk being chomped. The process continued for a while Naruto jumped about, and more sharks appeared out of the water to a point where he had to start slicing and dicing to make sure to make to make sure there were no injuries. Thankfully, before long he reached the solid ground where the sharks couldn't reach, and breathed a sigh of relief. Hearing a hissing sound and a small spike in latent chakra, Naruto looked to his feet and swore. With little time remaining, Naruto jumped and curved into a ball, flooding his coils with chakra and to reinforce his body. An explosion emanated from 6 explosive tags ripping through the air, and Naruto was thrown roughly and painfully through the large oak doors previously bearing the entrance of the ballroom. Ozpin gripped his cane tightly as the sounds of fighting picked up in frequency. Goodwitch was behind him, pacing, while the other teachers present tried to keep some amount of semblance and calm over the students now trapped inside the hall. The music was still playing, a slow tune, but did nothing to hinder the noise of those dying outside. Osmond glanced over to Ironwood, who was still talking into his scroll in a desperate attempt to figure out what was happening on the other side of the doors. He had tried to persuade James from doing anything reckless when they managed a glance at the large group of enemy shinobi before they closed the door, but he didn't listen, and the short bursts of gunfire that had sprung up were abruptly cut off, one by one, until there was nothing but the clashing of steel and explosions. The fact that everyone in the hall heard the kingdom's greatest military get slaughtered didn't help the mood in the room. Osmond turned his gaze to the side, where Team Periwinkle and Ruby were huddling together. Even he had noticed the sour relations between the two teams in Kitsune ever since he had rescued them from Torwich and his accomplice, and although it was sad to see such things occur, it was nothing he hadn't seen before. They were clearly concerned for their friend, glancing at the doors every so often, and flinching every time there was a louder than normal shout or explosion. He was even surprised to notice the general's assistant, Winter, doing the same, although with a frown across her face rather than a forlorn hope and worry. He grimaced and turned back to the door after a particularly large explosion shook the ground hard enough that a few people tripped over. Things, it seemed, was really heating up out there, although he wished nothing more than for the boy, only a year older than the students he was in the team with, to win, but he couldn't help but be concerned about what was going to happen if he lost. While he didn't doubt his capabilities, he was facing over 30 adults with the experience to go along with it, and he wasn't sure if Kitsune was capable in winning the current battle. The question was what was going to happen if he did lose. Would the shinobi leave? Would they take them hostage? There were certainly some high priority targets present. Two daughters of Shni and the general of Atlas military, to name a few. Perhaps they would just kill them to send a message. They certainly have reason to. Ospen's thoughts shattered after a large explosion that sounded worryingly close to the hall. In the time it took to process this, the door was torn apart, pelting a hastily erected telekinetic barrier, courtesy of Glinda, with splinters and chunks of wood. The screams and shouts of the students and teachers alike are cut off when something heavy slams into the barrier with a loud grunt of pain and slides down it to slump on the ground. The smoke soon clears enough for the figure to be identified as the object of Osprey's previous thoughts, groaning slightly on the ground. Kitsune! The cry came loud, and a flurry of rose petals flew past swiftly, followed by the young leader's friends. Are you all right? Para asked in concern, blushing when she caught the looks others were sending her. It was a silly question in hindsight. Kitsune's clothes were thrashed burnt black on the front, with his harness hanging by a small strip of charred leather, and ripped in the back from his connection with the doors. His body remained fine, however, if a little red from the heat and a few cuts here and there. Naruto grunted and hauled himself to his feet without acknowledging the people behind him. 17 fighters, 1 leader. He counted off his previous kills. This just got a whole lot harder, he muttered to himself. He tilted his head slightly. Ospen, this is about to get messy. I want everyone on the second floor. Ospen frowned at the request. No, command. You worry for our safety? No, I worry for mine when I have to put myself in the way to protect some headstrong students, he responded coolly, fingering a kunai as he scanned the still clearing smoke. Ironwood stepped forward with a hard look on his face. If you think you can order us around like nothing. Ironwood, you are in no place to argue after sending your men to die, thinking that they would serve as anything other than lambs to the slaughter. Kitsune said offhandedly. I didn't know you cared, Ospen inquired. I don't. The stench of their bodies was starting to get to me, he growled, creating a few shocked gasps from the crowd. The smoke suddenly billowed, and a Suna Nin appeared out of it, a skimmer already in motion to behold the blonde shinobi. Naruto, having sensed him coming, rolled under the swing, slicing the back of the man's knees and hamstring, bringing him down with a painful yell. He swung again, and desperate this time, and Naruto caught him at the wrist and easily broke it and dislocated the shoulder. He swung underneath the arm, slashing his chest as he went and stuck him in the throat. The missing grabbed at his profusely bleeding throat in a desperate attempt at stifling the blood pouring out, but it was a futile effort, and he soon collapsed on the ground. Naruto scoffed when he heard the sounds of horrified gasps and screams from the students, and when a few people throwing up, 17 fighters, 1 leader, 16 fighters, 1 leader. He turned back to Ospin, ignoring the horrified looks his teammates gave him, and locked eyes with the man. Second floor, now! He punctuated his command with a pulse of chakra that obliterated what remained of Good Witch's barrier. This time there were no arguments, and teachers and students alike hurried to obey the shinobi that literally killed somebody in 2 seconds flat right before their eyes. Naruto rolled his shoulder and kept his eyes on the door. After a little while the rest of the shinobi filed in, receiving a few nervous glances from the students and hurried movements from those that had yet to make it up the stairs. Naruto stood deceptively calm in the face of 16 opponents, especially ones as dangerous as those facing him. A minute tickled by, and the final students were safely on the second floor. Only then did Teikoijin walk through the doors, his intimidating posture and size silencing everyone in the hall. He looked up at the second level balconies on either side and scoffed at the terrified looks sent his way. He looked at the lines of shinobi under his command, and then back at the lone blonde in front of them. With a grunt of response, he nodded at Naruto. "I'm impressed, kid. There's not many around that could do what you've done, so I'm going to give you one final chance to surrender somewhat peacefully," Teikojin offered, crossing his muscled arms. Naruto said nothing and backed up a few steps, throwing a kunai into each other with a tag attached. A few seconds later, a see-through barrier appeared between the first and second floors. The only way one could see there was a barrier was the dark blue outline arranged around the edges. Naruto ignored the surprised mutters of the audience and finally drew his ninja toe and held it vertically behind his back while holding the kunai he used earlier horizontally in front of him. "If you want something, come and take it," he uncharacteristically snarled, flaring both his enormous chakra capability and killing intent at the group. Smirking underneath his mask when he saw a few falter, Tekiogen frowned and stepped back behind the line. He nodded at the teenager. "Take him," he ordered. The Mexican obeyed and advanced slowly to Naruto's position, causing him to take further steps back or avoid getting permanently surrounded. One of the advancing shinobi suddenly broke rank with a zealous yell and charged Naruto with a katana held high. Naruto ducked under the swing and elbowed him in the back as he went past. He raised his ninja toe, this time to parry another attack, this time from a kunoichi who tried to attack when his back was turned. He kicked her away and ducked once more, this time spinning and slicing him neatly across the throat as he passed. 15 fighters, 1 leader. Naruto blindly blocked another swing, and he turned back around and punched the offender in the face. This gave him time to hastily deflect 3 other attacks before finally one managed to cut across his cheek before he could fully maneuver his head away. He quickly punished the perpetrator with a stab through the heart, but his blood had finally been spilled. A blooming, finally, booming laughter came from the entrance. "So he can bleed!" He laughed again as Naruto backed away slightly. Naruto kissed his teeth, focused. 15 annoyances, 1 bastard. This time Naruto attacked, stepping forward. He disappeared in a blur and reappeared less than a moment later with his sword sticking out the back of the foremost enemy ninja. While his allies had yet to recover from their surprise, he withdrew his ninja toe and sliced another across the throat and simultaneously threw the kunai he held into the forehead of the one behind him with startling efficiency and speed to both his opponents and viewers. 11 annoyances, one bastard. By now the others had recovered and began to swarm his position with obvious killing intent. He ducked under the first, blocked the second and third, span out the way of the fourth, punched and kicked a fifth and sixth to disrupt their attempts before gaining another cut along his right arm. He ignored it in favor of blocking two attacks at the same time, holding his blade vertically as they both tried to bisect him. One paid with an elbow to the throat, collapsing his windpipe. The other managed to dodge the swipe he made with another kunai. 10 annoyances, one bastard. He ducked low and slid back down somebody's leg as they tried to attack while he was occupied. He two-feeted him in the back, throwing him forward, and he manipulated his chakra to create a spike of earth that rose out of the ground to impale him. Using the momentum he had gained, he rolled into a mule kick and nailed the kunoichi behind in the stomach, sending her flying back. 9 annoyances, one bastard. Back on his feet, he was immediately assailed by two others with katanas once again. Pulling him back on the defensive, he soon found himself pushing further and further back against his will as two more joined against him, forcing up the stairway up to the second floor. Obviously, he couldn't let this happen. Naruto raised his ninjato at the last minute so that the blade of the katana only minorly cut through his shoulder. The offender, having thought he was going to strike completely, stumbled forward unbalanced after throwing all his weight into the attack, straight into a waiting kunai, which disappeared into his chest up to the ring. The body collapsed into the path of another, tripping them, while a third attacked from the side. Naruto used this to his advantage by trapping his sword arm to the shoulder by his own, keening him in the stomach to wind him. When the fourth appeared to attack, he didn't hesitate to throw him in the path of the blade. He didn't even have time to register he had killed his own ally, before Nijito entered his throat, before exiting sideways in time to block dual kunai. Naruto engaged the final of the small group for a short time until he too was killed, this time by losing the head entirely. 5 annoyances, one bastard. Naruto panted slightly, even with his stamina exhausted. Exhaustion was starting to creep up on him. This was why, when he finally sensed the shinobi behind him, he only had time to partially block a kick that sent him back down the stairs. Naruto landed heavily on his feet and hastily blocked a heavy swipe that, although protected his body, launched his blade carrying across the floor. Naruto grunted as the kick hit him in the chest and sent him winded to the floor, and he nearly missed raising his arm up to block a kunai stab aimed at his throat. They struggled for a few minutes before he finally kicked out with his foot, catching his assailant in the kneecap, snapping the leg in half. The shinobi went down in a scream of pain, clutching to the section of the leg that was bent in the wrong direction. Naruto stood, looked towards the final four, ignoring the crippled one behind him and Kyojin for now. Naruto glanced at his sword over by the wall. Fast he may be, but he'd never get there unscathed. Conveniently, his final opponent also seemed to be weaponless, bearing the standard kunai. Naruto sighed in annoyance and flicked his heel back, hitting the shinobi behind him in the nose, breaking it and knocking him out both. He took a steps away from the body to ensure he wouldn't trip over it, and set himself the typical taijutsu stance employed by Konoha, his normal hummingbird stance too recognizable to use in present company. Naruto clenched his jaw at the mocking grins the others sent his way, at his defiance as they started forwards, arms raised. The first came at him with a wide haymaker. Evidently hand-to-hand wasn't his forte, so as Naruto easily slipped him a hand into the crook of his elbow and jabbed his own fist into his face, knocking out a few teeth and forcing him to back off. He was loud when the other three set upon him from different angles, once again forcing Naruto on the back foot, fending off attacks from multiple angles, and rarely getting a shot in of his own. It was also at this point where exhaustion was finally getting to him. More and more hits were getting through his guards, which wasn't helping by his less than perfectly hand-to-hand skills, while formidable compared to those in the room and even many back home, well short of his other trades. He grunted as the healed foot impacted his stomach, but he didn't let that faze him when he batted aside two more attacks from either side. So focused on this, he didn't notice the shinobi, whose teeth he'd knocked out, sneak behind him until his arms wrapped tightly around his torso. The blonde momentarily panicked as his arms became pinned to his sides and his breath left his lungs. The other three capitalized on this by throwing themselves at the boy to try and get as many hits in as they could in a short time. He fought the first off with a shove to the chest with his foot. The second caught him right on the jaw before he too was dispatched. The final missed and instead hit his ally in the face behind him as he strong-armed himself out of the way. The hit, although weakened the hold, held firm, but that was rectified with a swift elbow to the gut. The more than winded than already stunned man, who staggered back even further out of the loop. The man still in front was not phased, however, at hitting his own ally right on his already battered face, went for another swing towards his own pretty masked face. The attack and two more that followed were slapped aside in quick succession, and the blonde scored his own hit to his opponent's solar plexus, forcing him to bend over where a knee suitable found its place, breaking his nose. He seemed to be doing that a lot lately. The kunoichi he launched before came at him with a high kick aimed at to hit his throat, which he batted aside. She took it in stride and swung round with her other leg with added momentum that brushed his hair when he ducked underneath it. Once again he came round, but this time he raised his forearm to stop it in its tracks. He grunted a little at the force behind it, but held his ground and used the now immobile leg to drag the kunoichi closer. Using my own strength and the speed she gained to slam a fist into her throat, she collapsed immediately. She hadn't even hit the ground yet when the first shinobi came flying over her body. He landed a kick straight into Naruto's stomach, sending him tumbling back winded. He didn't have time to deliberate on the action as another blow, this time from behind, struck the inside of his knee, collapsing his leg. He raised his left and blocked another kick, but as he turned he received a hit across his temple. He saw stars, but he rolled with the strike and moved further away. His vision cleared in time to bat down a knee heading towards his chin and throw in his own punch to the chest. It connected but only freed up space of the other two, who was pushed aside, but the other came with kunai and sliced the cut over his shoulder and into the metal plate of his headband. Naruto grabbed his wrist and struck the elbow. Though didn't break his arm like intended, it still forced him to drop the kunai, which Naruto swiftly caught. Naruto stood and swept aside another kick and replied with an elbow that he was pretty sure broke a jaw. For another 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the four intently fighting, with the three missing men ganging up on the poor blonde. He was taking more and more hits by the second, but still dishing out his own punishment. The turning point eventually fell in Naruto's favor when one of the shinobi stumbled after overextending and fell into his partner. The third went to look over at the commotion and received a kunai to the temple for his troubles. The other two recovered and attacked at the same time, one with low kick and one with a punch. With two being a much more manageable number than three, they were both easily blocked and both pushed back. The first recovered quicker and re-engaged Naruto and paid him his folly with a broken neck. The second, now realizing he was alone, came slower and more cautious of the fact that I had killed basically all his allies, but still attacked nonetheless. They traded the blows for a little while longer before Naruto scored a hit with a knee to the stomach as he hunched over. The blonde sprung the rest of his leg into his opponent's chest, making him stumble backwards. Naruto didn't let up, however, advancing further and continued to rain blows across the missing nin's body as he tried in vain to put up some sort of defense. For the final time, Naruto broke his guard, withdrawing the final literal trick up his sleeve. It disappeared up to the ring in the shinobi's chin. There was a moment there where all was quiet before Naruto ripped the blade out. The body hit the floor with a thud. Naruto breathed out deeply. Zero annoyances, one bastard. He wasn't finished yet. End of chapter 13.